Conscientiousness, that's a big predictor. Openness, that's associated with creativity, intelligence. Here's some combinations. If you're disagreeable and neurotic, you tend to have personality disorder. So those are the two big personality markers of personality disorders. If you're extroverted and disagreeable, think about that. You know people like this. They're really social and they're really, you know, they're not that empathic. They're selfish. They're narcissists. If you're extroverted and disagreeable, you have a proclivity towards narcissism. And you might think, well, that's an awful thing. And maybe it is, but actors? I mean, how narcissistic do you have to be an actor? Well, that's a hard question, right? Because you obviously have to have some self-confidence that goes beyond the norm. So, anyways. This is a summary of what we know about emotion and motivation in relationship to the emotions. So, we know that extroversion is associated with incentive reward, hope, curiosity, play, enthusiasm. That seems to be associated with dopaminergic function and with the part of the hypothalamus that governs exploratory behavior. So it's an approach circuit. And so it seems that people who are extroverted have a lower threshold for having that circuit activated. Maybe it's something like that, or maybe unless they're stimulated, they don't have enough positive emotion. It's not that easy to tell. Extroverts harvest attention from the social group. So you think about these as ways of adapting to the world. Like the social group is full of resources, and if you're assertive and you're popular, then you can benefit from the accrual of social resources. It puts you up the dominance hierarchy, so it's a good strategy for moving. It's one good strategy for moving ahead. Neuroticism, pain, frustration, disappointment, fear, anxiety. Those seem to be associated with GABA circuits, because those are the circuits that Valium and barbiturates and benzodiazepines affect. And it's also the case that as you move up the dominance hierarchy and your serotonin levels rise, your negative emotion gets more well regulated. Whereas if you fall down the dominance hierarchy, then your negative emotions get less regulated. Probably your positive emotions too. Agreeableness, empathy, sympathy, compliance, care system. That's the care system that Jaak Panksepp described. So if you're interested in that, you could read a bit more about that. That's maternal circuitry, essentially. That runs on oxytocin. So agreeable people, can always tell when I have an agreeable person in my clinical practice, because what happens when they come in is that they instantly start to talk about relationships. You know, so they'll lay out their biography. And like a conscientious person will talk about the things they have to do and the things they've done over their life. And an open person will say, well, here's the things I'm really interested in. You know, but an agreeable person will say, well, from 1982 to 1987, I went out with this person, and then I had a relationship with this person. And so they naturally seem to configure their biographies in terms of dyadic, intimate relationships. So, whereas the disagreeable people, you know, well, they're not so good at that kind of thing. And if you talk to engineers, for example, and I've talked to a lot of them in Silicon Valley, they're pretty oriented towards things, and their interpersonal skills can be, well, interesting to say the least. But you know, they invent lots of interesting things, so like, hooray, go engineers. We've talked about conscientiousness, and it seems to be associated with disgust and guilt and shame. And if you think about it as an adaptive strategy, orderliness means stay uncontaminated and sparkly clean. You know, it's like an efficiency strategy, everything in its place. And so that way you don't have to expend as much energy to get the results of your labor. You know what it's like if you're trying to work in your office and it's a complete bloody disaster, right? You expend a whole bunch of energy just coping with the fact that you're surrounded by chaos before you even get down to what it is that you're supposed to work at. Industriousness, well, industrious people seem to implement their goals. And maybe they've got to be of some social utility too, I would suspect, right? Because if you're an industrious person and you get a reputation for that, then people are going to want you around because, like, you'll do the work. And one thing I will tell you that might also be useful as you progress through life is that if you get into an organization and you are diligent and you really commit to what you're doing, you might be cynical about whether or not that's going to be noticed, but I'll tell you, if you're not conscientious, you'll never figure out why you don't advance. What'll happen is that a bunch of doors that could open to you just won't. Because if you're conscientious, so like I find this with my students, is some of them I can say, because I have more opportunities than I know what to do with usually, and so if I have students I can say, well, you know, here, you could do this. And then if they come back 3 weeks later and they say, well, here's 4 reasons why I couldn't do it, and they're all good reasons, you know, but it's not done, and then someone else comes back and it's 4 weeks later and they say, here it is, then the next time I have an opportunity, then the person who did it gets it. And so what happens is that in almost all organizations, there's a certain percentage of people who are conscientious and intelligent and are doing almost all the work. And they're always looking around for other people who are like that. Like, they don't go out of their way to advertise it, but if you're like that and you come to their attention, they'll open doors for you and you won't even know it. And so it'll be like you progress upwards and there's no reason that you'll even necessarily know why. Whereas if you're not doing it, people won't come out and whack you on the head and say, well, you should improve in these 6 ways and, you know, pay a lot of attention to you. They just won't allow you to have any opportunities. And then you won't even know it. So that's not good, unless you want to, you know, unless you're not that ambitious, which, you know, is not necessarily a bad thing.